our next speaker, who's Jackie Healing, General Manager of Brand and Quality at Coles Supermarkets. Jackie has over 20 years' experience of food retailing globally, working with growers and manufacturers to develop and supply differentiated, sustainable products which deliver exceptional quality and value to customers. As well as working to improve welfare, I know that there's something else that Jackie and I have in common. I noted from her biography that she also grew up in the UK in the mad cow disease era. So neither of us are allowed to donate our blood in Australia. It's tainted, apparently. But she's done an awful lot of good things apart from blood donation. Developing enhanced welfare programs for meat quality in poultry and pigs, the removal of artificial colours and flavour enhancers from packaged foods, development of implementation of a sustainable seafood initiative, and the development of product ranges aimed at enhancing health and wellness. So I'd like you all to give a warm welcome to Jackie, who is going to speak about, is it just a nice to do? A retailer's perspective. Thank you.
I won't need my glasses, I can see that screen. That's very handy. It's a sufficient number of arms away for me to be able to read it. Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome back from lunch. And as per that kind introduction, my name is Jackie Healing. I look after all of the Coles brand product propositions in the Coles brand and the fresh food space, all of our seafood, poultry, bakery, and meat products, as well as our packaged groceries from the point of view of their quality and I guess their ethical and sustainability stance. And I'm going to talk this afternoon a little bit about why animal welfare matters to me as an individual and why it matters to our business, and I think increasingly to brand owners globally that work in this food space. So without further ado, we'll kick off. Let's make sure I can work this. Yes, okay. So a little bit about Coles from the point of view of protein, I guess, and livestock. So supermarket business, you'd all know it. I'm sure many of you, hopefully all of you, visit it every now and again. About 15 million customers a week will come through our door. 15 million transactions a week will come through our door. And we have an Australian first sourcing policy, and obviously for reasons of biosecurity, we source pretty much all of our proteins from this country. What is different about how we operate now versus probably how we were operating 5 to 7 years ago is that we now have a very distinct and direct relationship with most of those producers. So increasingly, we know the farmers that are working on certainly the protein for our products, and increasingly the horticulture lines as well. And we have a direct line of sight to those farmers. We have direct contractual relationships with those producers in many instances. And as a consequence, over the last 5 years, myself and members of my team have visited hundreds and hundreds of farms, working with those producers to enhance their programs from the point of view of product quality, product safety, and of course welfare. We've always had a position around the 5 principles, although I don't think we've had it enacted anything like as strongly in the organisations we have had for the last 3 to 4 years. And we carry a range of RSPCA approved products, and that's probably, I guess, the simpler end of our offer from a welfare point of view, and it's easy and clear messaging to our customers. The more challenging area, and I guess the area I'll probably spend most of my time sort of referring to, are the products that we list in the business that do not carry the RSPCA stamp of approval, but nevertheless we work and endeavour to bring those products through to the highest welfare standards that we can, recognising the challenge that we have around balancing those good practices, and certainly good practices in the eyes of many in this room, with the very real and apparent need to have affordable protein on the plate of the Australian consumer, many of whom shop for an entire family of 4 every week on less than $150. So some idea of scale. I think somebody earlier this morning talked about scale, and it's probably worth just reflecting on this for a few minutes. It's a lot of product. You know, 1.5 million birds a week in the poultry space, put on the ground every week, cleared out of the sheds every week, processed through for our offer. Beef, pork, lamb, milk, eggs, 10,000 beef cattle a week going through the slaughterhouses that are working on our part. So it's a big, big business. And I think when I talk with many very strong welfare advocates around their perception of food manufacture, it's often very much focused on that niche end. And it's really important to appreciate that, our primary responsibility is to sell food and to feed families in Australia. And it's not possible to do that out of small-scale niche operations. It's just not possible. And so you've got to be operating with these large-scale operations, tens of thousands of birds sitting in sheds, feedlot farming, pork farming on quite a large scale to even get the volume of food out there that we need. And handling the welfare in those environments is quite a different dynamic than handling it in your small holding backyard kind of operations that I think is the idealised view of many people that I certainly talk to. So really, it's all about what do our customers tell us they want us to do. At the end of the day, if we don't offer what the customer wants from us, we will not be in business. And I think I'd argue, and I have had robust debates in this space, if we're in the business of trying to do the right thing, which I genuinely think that we are, it's better that the customer shops with us because we're trying to do the right thing, that we go too far on that journey too quickly, impact potentially the cost of the products for them, and therefore they don't come and shop with us and they go back and shop somewhere else. Because if that somewhere else doesn't carry those higher welfare products or doesn't have a commitment to no caged eggs in the way that we do, it doesn't actually move the agenda forward at all from the point of view of animal welfare. So we spend millions of dollars listening to what customers tell us. And, what they tell us is that they want to know more and more and more about their food supply chain. They want to know where it comes from, how it's produced, what's in it. But they also need to feed their family affordably. And they also expect this to be a given when they come and shop in a supermarket. About half the customers we talk to about animal welfare just don't want to know about it. They expect us to do the right thing and they're not interested and therefore not verbally concerned about how their food is produced. It's actually a very small number of people who are actively seeking out that higher welfare product. And the vast majority of them, certainly when they come to supermarkets, don't want to pay any more for it. So it's a real challenge. It's a really challenging space that we have to try and manage. But we do manage it, and we do try hard to manage. This is a complicated slide, but essentially this is mapping a little bit of human psychology around supermarket shopping. And what the supermarkets endeavour to do in terms of making, as opposed to moving out of a transactional space, I think there's a light on here, but oh no, that's a disaster. Okay, we won't worry about that. Moving out of the transactional space, which is up there called sort of comfort and control, where people just come in and they get what they want and they get it done and they get out, to moving them into an emotionally connected space. Now, emotionally connecting with a supermarket is a pretty challenging space to try and get yourself into. It's not like your hairdresser or your little coffee shop or your shoe shop in my instance. But if you can get people into that emotional connection, then you get loyalty. And if you can get loyalty in a supermarketing business, that is your absolute epitome of where you're trying to get to. Because when you have a customer offering that people actively seek out because they're loyal to you, they will choose you as their destination, even if your major competitor is sitting right next door. And that's the sort of the nub of what it is we're trying to do. So it's very important to us that we get those comfort and control factors right, and then we can try and drive customers into that emotional engagement and loyalty space. And that's where the doing good kind of factors sit, because if we can get them in there, then they're going to come back and shop with us time after time. And that's obviously great for us. So when we talk about a whole raft of things that we've been doing in this space, from a quality perspective to taking colours out to whatever, and we focus in on animal welfare, we've probably done more overtly in the space of welfare improvements for animals, particularly around the areas of confinement, than in the shortest period of time that I've ever known in my retail career, which is spanning nearly 30 years now. And it's certainly done us good. So we're seen as the best supermarket in that space, in the vast majority of areas that you'd expect. But the gap is closing. The Woolworths announcements last year, on eggs have made that gap much less wide than it was. But we still have some leading ground, so it's really benefited us as a business. And it's committed customers to come to us because they see us doing the right thing. So it's important that we stay on the journey. It's important that we maintain that differentiation because, as I said earlier, that's going to drive customers into our stores. Terry showed you some pictures of beef operations a while ago, and these are two operations that supply into Coles. And I think it's always, for me, quite interesting to consider, what do customers actually think we're doing in this space? And are we doing what they expect us to be doing? And if not, what can we do about it? What would we do about it? In this instance, you've got two quite distinct sort of cattle operations, one in the south, a purely grass-fed offer, labelled as such, probably more in line with what certainly Southern Australia and certainly me from the UK expect cattle to be doing. And then you've got your feedlot operation sitting up outside Brisbane. Again, a perfectly good operation, accredited in multiple ways, probably some of the best welfare in feedlots that we would see. But maybe not in line with what customers would be thinking. And I don't have the answer to that because we need both those operations. You can't get cattle in the north of the country unless you do finish them in feedlots, pretty much. And you will, there's a strong argument, and I think a very true argument, that if you don't have that way of finishing them, then you're either not going to have them up there or they're going to not be well fed. They're going to be starving because there isn't sufficient pasture up there to support the cattle populations that we need up there to feed the country and indeed increasingly the world. So that's some of the emotional reasons why we might do it, but there's actually incredibly good financial reasons. So these are pictures of poultry, chicken pictures, and examples of what can happen if your litter in a chicken shed isn't in great condition, and usually because it's wet, usually because it's overly contaminated with fecal matter of some sort or another. And you get this burning of the feet and burning of the hocks. Here's a pretty extreme example, which doesn't look great and is all the rest of it, but it's actually worth, just on the sale of the feet into the Asian market, over 4 cents a bird if you have that happen on the feet. So there's very, very good reason why you would want to manage your chicken litter in a way that doesn't allow that to happen, because whilst the feet don't find their way very often into supermarkets in this country, they do into some, they certainly have a very strong market overseas. And our key poultry suppliers that are working with the RSPCA standard tell us that the mortality is lower for them, that the amount of breakage in the wings are lower for them, and that actually the system overall, after they've paid for the infrastructure required to put the change in the first place, and that's where the biggest impact is for the producers if you go too fast with these programs. The actual productivity of the operations are at least as good, if not better, than they were before they made the change, which is a great outcome and probably something that we don't measure and talk about enough. And we're starting to do some quite considerable work in this area to understand, the return on capital investment effectively for the producers, so that we can better communicate to them why we want them to do this, and we can understand what we're asking of them financially and support them through that journey. Terry talked about cattle. It's running, I think the MLA figures suggest about 5% of dark cutters coming through the chain. It's probably a bit better than that now. We, on the cattle we buy and rear, see around 2%, something of that order. And those animals are then obviously downgraded as a consequence of that. They can't be used for prime cuts. And the really tragic thing about it, as Terry said, is you can do it in the last 20 seconds into the abattoir. And you spent 2 years growing this animal. And then the last 20 seconds up the run or through the race or whatever causes the stress, results in a significant downgrading of the meat. And I don't know what cattle are selling for at the minute, Terry? $1,300 an animal? Yeah, around $1,300 an animal, highest ever price. So you don't really want to be chucking it out, yeah? And from my perspective, increasingly, we have a responsibility. We've got a massive pressure on us to feed the world's population over the next 50 years. And so any of this waste in the food chain is a terrible thing to be involved with. Brand reputation, obviously, if you get it wrong and it gets exposed, and it's increasingly likely to get exposed if you do get it wrong, can be exceptionally damaging for brands. A few years ago, I think it was about 2010 when the pork stories emerged in Tasmania. I'm looking to Heather, she's nodding her head. 2010. I know that was when I hadn't long been in Australia, hadn't long been working for Coles, and the expose occurred, and my MD called me up and said, we're absolutely sure all our pork farms are in a good state. And I wouldn't be able to tell you whether they are or they're not. We didn't at that time know. You know, as it turned out, were not impacted by that particular issue. We didn't source any pork from farms in Tasmania at that time. But it cost us something like 7% of sales overnight on pork, just overnight. So it's significant if it happens, and it's significant even if you're not involved, even if it's not your farm and it's not your producers. So, you know, there's a real responsibility on we're as strong as our weakest link, unfortunately. And I'm sure Terry comes across that analogy time and time again. You know, many, and most of the industry are doing their very best and doing an exceptionally good job. But you have to be on your game because, you know, some of these stories are people that I'm familiar with plants and areas that we've worked with, and you know, none of them were ever condoned or intended. But the consequences of a single bad practice from a single worker for some reason can be devastating for your business. Another good reason that we see in doing it is obviously from our own business's perspective, we want to stay in line with world's best practice. We have an aspiration to be amongst the world's best retailers. You never know what the future of your organisation could be. There's a lot of global consolidation. Retailing is a global business. For manufacturers and producers, the export market is critical. And you want to be up with your competitors in that space. And if the rest of the world is moving on around lairage cameras, live feeds on dairy farms, no-tail docking, whatever the issue might be, then you want to be in line with that if you're a producer, because you want to protect your market unless you're in a very niche Australian-only position and you intend to stay there. So we would encourage people to do it to stay up with the best. So from Coles' point of view, we do this because it makes a difference to the product quality and the commitment that we get from our consumers through loyalty with the proteins that we sell in our business. It's been a journey that I've been privileged to be involved in. It's been a journey that's been running in its current kind of level of passion and enthusiasm for about 5 years, I think now, 5 or 6 years. But it's by no means over, and there's an awful lot more we still need to do. But we have these principles and commitments within the business that we will follow the 5 principles, the RSPCA principles. We aspire to full lifetime traceability on every species that we sell. Now, the cattle industry, I'm calling the cattle industry, you know, there is an MVD system in the cattle industry that in theory gives you that, but in reality, we find around 20% of them incorrectly filled in, and it certainly isn't timely. So what I want to be able to do is, you know, tell you overnight, get overnight to the farm that gave me the cattle that we've slaughtered and put into the packet of mince that I bought off the shelf today. It's critical you can do that in the event of any biosecurity or food safety issue, but it's also critical that you can do it from a customer trust point of view. They increasingly expect you to be able to tell them the farms that animals have been reared on. They want to know exactly where it came from. We invest in research. We support through the codes of contact with our suppliers about how we will work with our producers and our farmers, what the payment terms need to look like, all of these things that are very, very important in order that producers can commit to and make the investments we would need them to make to move forward on this journey, because it's significant. $1 million for a chicken shed, commercial-sized chicken shed. You know, typically you need 3 sheds for egg production into the RSPCA standard versus 1 for a cage. So it's 3 times the price to put the infrastructure down. So you've got to help them be able to do that. You've got to give them long-term commitment. You've got to give them line of sight on their businesses so they can even raise the funds to do it, because otherwise the banks won't support them. So, you know, it's a simple thing to say, and it's actually quite a complicated thing to do. And we spend a lot of time out in the field helping producers get their heads around it, helping them write their business cases, helping them get funding from the banks to help them move on this journey. In terms of what it'll look like for us over the next 12 months, well, I've talked about the trace back to farm for all the species. That inevitably will identify for us where there's sale yard practices. We prefer to minimise those as far as possible. We know that they're not great for the productivity, never mind the stress level of the animal. We want to continue to move forward on our reduction in confinement, be that in eggs or pork particularly, and we will, over the next 12 months, start to map our supply chain with respect to bobby calves. First thing to do is to know where you are. That means that you need to know every single farm supplying milk into your chain. You need to not be in the business of trading milk through your processors, and then you can establish what's going on those individual farms. So that's sort of the corporate world, I suppose, and why we do what we do. But I thought I'd finish just with a little bit about, am I standing here on the stage leading this, speaking to you this afternoon, leading this program for Coles because I've been told to do it? Well, actually, no, it's not really that at all. This is an exceptionally important thing for me personally. I am an animal lover. That is my horse, Billy, one of my horses at the top. That is my apparent Whippet Cross rescue dog that was fitting the specification of a small, short-haired dog when we got him in January. I have to tell you, we got his DNA test back yesterday. He is a greyhound wolfhound cross. He has put on 5 kilos in 10 weeks and is outside of specification quite clearly, but we love him to pieces. I grew up and was at university during the 80s, and I am therefore a person who in the next 10 to 15, maybe 20 years will know amongst myself and my peer group whether or not the amount of BSE-infected beef that we almost certainly ate at that time will in fact have a long-term effect on our health. We don't know today, but I regularly think about that experience and I regularly reflect on why that ever happened. Not because it's particularly related to welfare, but because it's related to irresponsible practice in the food chain, in my view. And I feel absolutely passionately that I don't want that happening on my watch. It's not right. It wasn't done intentionally to be wrong, but it wasn't right. And we should know better, and we should continue to reflect and learn on those sorts of experiences. Because a very close friend of mine has just been diagnosed with motor neurone disease. And whilst I'm a scientist and I know there shouldn't be a connection, you can't help but doubt. Has that got anything to do with the era in which we grew up and the food that we ate? Probably not, but it makes me wonder. I've been privileged to lead the journey for Coles. But I'm particularly proud of the work we've done with eggs and with pork. I know we haven't done the whole journey that people in this room would expect of us, but we have taken hundreds of thousands of hens out of cages. We now no longer sell any caged eggs under our Coles brand. And be it 10,000 birds per hectare or 1,500 birds per hectare that you would prefer us to work with, these birds are no longer confined in the way that they were. And that is a great achievement. And the same for the pigs. We do no longer permit, and haven't permitted for over 2.5 years now, sows to be confined for any longer than that 24-hour mating period. And I really would challenge anybody outside of this room to see that change and see the difference in the way those sows behave and not believe it's the right thing to do. And of course you get to go out with a hunky chef every now and again as well. So that's my story.
Thanks so much, Stephanie.
No problem.
That's great. Do we have any questions? Ooh. Up at the back. Got a mic going up. Thanks, Melina.
Di Johnson is my name, and may I say that was a very, very interesting talk. I'm a shareholder in a number of companies, and I wondered whether you've had any shareholder action on animal welfare which has perhaps encouraged you to take the course that you're taking.
It's interesting, probably not directly. We have a lot of, it does come up occasionally at the AGM, but interestingly, I mean, clearly we're Coles are part of West Farmers. West Farmers are clearly an agriculturally based organisation originally. I think disappointingly, we probably had it more on the other side. We probably had more conversation at the AGMs from, certainly in the early days, from farmers groups who didn't support our position than we have had from shareholders supportive of what we were doing. We've moved on in that space, I'm glad to say.
I'll give you my mic, John. That's easier.
There's not a question, just a comment. John Hellstrom. Cole's stance on sour crates was very helpful in terms of getting our changes in New Zealand. So you had an impact across the Tasman as well. I can thank you for that.
Oh, well, thank you much indeed. We're proud to have done that.
Mark Shipp, Australian Government Department of Agriculture. Thanks for the presentation, and you spoke about finding the balance between welfare and supply. I wondered if you could also touch upon biosecurity with so many birds moving into free range and being exposed to avian influenza. I wonder if the customer is right in their expectations and whether there isn't a responsibility to also ensure that there's good biosecurity. With the high pathogenic avian influenza in North America, we've seen 15.5 million birds destroyed in the last few weeks. And I fear that we're facing the same situation here in Australia.
Mm. Yeah, it's a challenging one. I think we're more than aware of the challenges. I mean, I think in the free range egg production systems, we've lost the battle a little bit with the consumer from the point of view of understanding about what a barn system could mean for the welfare of those birds. We find that we just are unable to convince customers that that's a proposition that they should buy into from a welfare point of view. And so the access to the range has become something that's really, really critical from a customer perspective. And so that's, I guess, a trade-off that we're going to have to face into in the event that we can't do something to persuade customers that a barn or cage-free proposition is worth investing in. Today they don't believe it at all and they don't understand it. So I think there's a bit of an onus on us as retailers and a little bit on the industry as well to try and re-educate in that space. As far as was it responsible or irresponsible, I don't think we probably reflected on it like that. We just moved with what customers were telling us they wanted to stay competitive in the market at the time.
Yeah, time for one more question in the middle.
Hi Jackie, my name's Megan Darren from the RSPCA in Western Australia. I was wondering if you were able to share any light on Coles' philosophy for seafood production.
Oh, I'm very excited about our seafood. So we have a commitment to 100% sustainably sourced seafood by the end of this calendar year. That's a program that we have run now for 4 years. And essentially what it means is that we have conducted independent assessments of every fishery and boat combination of species that we sell in our stores. It's about 500 assessments done through collaboration with WWF. And we have a commitment, and it's a 3-tiered system that we've ensured there will be no what we consider red-rated species or what were red-rated species in the system by the end of the year through action plans to improve. From a are you talking from a welfare perspective, particularly on farmed, I guess, primarily? So it's an area we've looked at, but not an area we've got an active program in at this point in time. We've had a look at the Freedom Foods standard for salmon. There is a supplier in Tasmania that's been through an assessment to that standard that happens to be our supplier. So it is something that we could call out. But and we're working with Heather and her team on whether or not it's something that we can actually bring to life here in Australia as a concept. So yeah, it's on the radar, but we're not overly active in it at this stage.